I just want to say we are going to start with, first of all, with a tradition that is gaining momentum in North America coming from our Canadian friends. And that is we acknowledge that we are on the traditional land of the Osage and Kaw people. To do that, it means it's especially important for us as the water advocacy team, given that we are a group that is advocating for policy for sustainability of water in the state of Kansas and beyond. I want to explain a few things. We have a resource table that's up here. Some folks brought that. We have books up here. After will be a signing. Don will be able to do that. And then I've already talked about, we really would like for you to sign in, if you would. That makes us able to contact you about further events as well as what's happening with the water advocacy team. A little bit about the history of this. The water advocacy team that's hosting this really started maybe, believe it or not, 6 years ago, but emerged out of lettuce, which I'll explain in just a moment about lettuce. And in doing that, I'll probably start with us saying some more about the water advocacy team, and then I want to have the people who are co-sponsors here, I want to ask those people who are associated with the co-sponsors to stand. Because the co-sponsors have been very important in supporting this, in saying that they approve of us investigating and looking at these issues, and they've helped us publicize it as well. The water advocacy team has a connection that came through, believe it or not, for many people through the faith communities of lettuce. And I'm going to name all of those, and then if you are associated with them, I would like for you to stand. We're going to have our sponsors do that. Lettuce is 7 faith communities of the First Presbyterian Church, Lawrence Jewish Community Congregation, the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Lawrence, Plymouth Congregational, Orient Friends Meeting, St. John the Evangelist, and Trinity Episcopal Church. If any of you are affiliated with that, would you go ahead and stand? We're not going to applaud, we just want you to stand. Thank you. If you see some of these people and you want to ask questions of them, please do. And then we have a wonderful group that's relatively new, but very important, is the Kansas Women Environmental Network. Would people for that please stand? Good. Thank you. Thank you. Sierra Club Wakarusa Group, would you stand please? There you go. Thank you. Also, Jayhawk Olivan. Thank you. Some people are triple headers here. Kansas Rural Center. You'll stand, please. There we go. Thank you. All right. The League of Women Voters are in the back. They do have a booth because they have information on the upcoming city commission and the school board candidates. They have important information for you to have, and also if you'd like to register to vote. So thank you for being here. And then we have also the Friends of the Call. There we go. In the back. Thank you. And I want all of you who are Lawrence Community Mercantile members stand. Who belongs to Lawrence Mercantile? All right. Thank you very much. And then we have the Kansas Farmers Union. All right, thank you. All of these co-sponsors, please give them a hand for being so helpful tonight. My name is Thad Holcomb. I'm the convener for the water team, and it's been a pleasure to do that. The water team is made up of maybe up to 20 different people, and the water team advocacy team is open to anybody who'd like to participate. So ask me if you have any questions. And of course, first, I want to say some just guidelines for tonight. We want to thank Don Stull, of course, for being with us, and we introduced us to Luma. But we're going to take questions, but we're going to take questions by cards. So if you don't have a card, please get a card. And the cards are over here. Sarah has them available. And raise your hand if you need one. And then about 30 minutes, about 8 o'clock or so, you want to hand those in, and we'll give those to Don to do that. We're simply doing that so that we'll be able to cover what we can, and those questions that we don't address, we'll let you know through our communication with you. We're going to try to finish by 9:15. We have to be out of the building by 10 o'clock, have it all cleaned up, etc., and be able to be out of here at that time. But in the meantime, we've got snacks in the back, including some very fresh tomatoes. Zach Pistora brought those at home. and other good stuff. The tomatoes might be more nutritious for you than some of the other things, but anyway, take a look at those. I want now to introduce Paul Johnson, who will do the introduction for Don Stull. A lot of you know Paul Johnson. It's not that he's ancient by any means, right, Paul? But he's been around here a long time. He's been busy in good things. He's been an organic market gardener on his farm in southern Jefferson County. In 1994, was a founding member of the Rolling Prairie Farmers Alliance, CSA, that today sells produce to over 250 households in Lawrence, Kansas City, and Topeka. And since 1980, Paul has been a legislative advocate at the state capitol in Topeka on poverty, housing, energy, efficiency, water, environment, and local food issues. And today, Paul is the policy analysis for the Kansas Rural Center and consultant for the League of Women Voters. And he serves on the Jefferson County Planning and Zoning Commission. As he comes up here, I want the elected officials here, I want those of you, state legislature, county, city, please stand. Please stand. I know we have representative here, we have Nancy Commissioner, we have Boo. Okay, you want to introduce, some of these people don't know who you are. Introduce yourself.
I'm Jim Krauskent, the representative for the 42nd District, which includes part of Douglas County, Eudora, and then Tonganoxie and northern part of Leavenworth County.
Nancy, legal member.
I'm Nancy Feldman, I'm Douglas County Commissioner representing the 2nd District.
Nancy Feldman is County Commissioner. Boo, Hamburger in the back.
Blue Hamburger, representative for the 46th District, Lawrence.
Thank you very much for being here today. Paul, if you'll do the honors.
Well, welcome everybody for attending this evening. This is an honor and a privilege to introduce a friend and a true national expert on the industrialization of the beet industry in North America. Don led a team of experts in the mid-1980s to study the social and economic impact of a large beef plant in Garden City funded by the Ford Foundation, and the study lasted for 3 years. When they concluded that, beginning in the 1990s, Don embarked on a systematic investigation of beef, pork, and poultry processing plants and their impact on workers and communities throughout North America. From Oklahoma to Alberta, from Kentucky to Manitoba, Don went with other experts to communities to explain the social, economic, and environmental impacts to be expected. Beyond his stellar teaching career of anthropology at KU, Don and Michael Broadway wrote a national primer on the meat industry titled Slaughterhouse Blues, the Meat and Poultry Industry in North America. For several years, Don has served on the board of directors of the Organization for Competitive Markets, which is called OCM. And OCM asks the hard questions concerning a competitive meat market. Unfortunately, none that we will ever hear from our Senator Pat Roberts, who's chairman of the U.S. Senate Agricultural Committee. And the questions that are never going to be asked, whatever happened to the enforcement of any antitrust laws. We now have 4 firms that control 90% of the beef market, and many feedlots in our state and the country receive only 1 bid from a packer for their live cattle. JBS, a Brazilian firm, is now the largest meat company in the world, and JBS just paid a $3.2 billion fine for political corruption in Brazil, and JBS's CEO was jailed last week. In the pork market, 98% of all hog sales are packer-owned or forward contracted to a given packer. We have no free market left in the hog industry any longer. Smithfield Foods, which was the largest pork producer in the United States, was recently bought by a Chinese firm, so 1 in every 4 hogs in the United States is now owned by the Chinese. As a country, do we care? What does food sovereignty mean at this point? But really, the chicken industry is the most corporate controlled. Tyson owns the birds, the feed, and the veterinarian services. Chicken growers are only paid for the weight put on by these birds. It's truly involuntary servitude is what chicken growers are into. In many ways, the chicken industry came to Don's family farm in Kentucky. Kentucky decided to make a serious push for big chicken. And you should think of Kansas as I talk on this. In 1990, Kentucky had only 1.5 million broilers in the whole state. Like Kansas, we have very few broilers in our state. We have a few turkeys in southeast Kansas, and we have one egg operation in Rice County. But chickens are really not part of our state agriculture at this point. In 1990, Kentucky had 1.5 million broilers. Today, there are only over 300 million in that state. Don's family farm became surrounded by chicken houses. Don researched the impact on the communities, the workers, the chicken growers, and the land. Tonight, he will spell out what happened in Kentucky and what questions Kansas should be asking as to the complete social, the economic, and environmental costs Kansas would face if we embrace industrialized chicken. Please join me in a warm welcome for Professor Don Stull.
Thank you very much, Paul. He's already taken up much of my introduction, so I can get done quicker. I should say that I grew up as a Southern Baptist, and our preacher was this wonderful person who would speak for exactly 30 minutes with no props except the Bible. He only consulted it to read passages from the Scripture. And then promptly at noon we would be let out so that we could go home in time to watch whatever pro football game was on. I have fallen far from grace, and one of the things that I was not able to master, perhaps because I was never able to master grace, is a memorized talk in which I don't consult some piece of writing. So in order to say what I have to say and make sure that I show you the slides at the right time, I'm going to read from a script. I'm an enthusiastic meat eater, and the meat I so enjoy must come from somewhere. But the industrial system of meat and poultry production and processing have serious problems. As an applied anthropologist, I've tried to make my research useful for communities, producers, processing workers, and meatpacking companies themselves. My colleagues and I have taken what we have learned in Garden City, Kansas, Lexington, Nebraska, Guyman, Oklahoma, Webster County, Kentucky, and Brooks, Alberta, Canada, to other places, helping them decide whether they want a meat and poultry processing plant to come to their town. In some cases, communities have rejected proposed plants. In others, they have chosen them. In most cases, however, the choice to bring a packing plant was made by state and local officials before the general public even knew their town was under consideration. For those places where a new beef or pork or chicken plant was built, we have worked with local institutions and organizations to try to meet the challenges that inevitably come with such plants. Our work is premised on what's called the pliancy factor. When a prediction about what will happen in a community is presented to the members of that community, it may alter their behavior and thus change outcomes, hopefully for the best. 3 factors limit the pliancy of communities that host meat and poultry plants: the nature of the industry, the timing of the interventions, and the approach to development that a community takes. Meat and poultry companies promise rural communities economic development and job creation. And the firms do deliver jobs. But many communities pursue economic development without considering larger issues of community development. They equate development with jobs and see economic development as the sole means for community maintenance and improvement. But unless economic development results in improved quality of life, it can actually be detrimental. For small towns with stagnant or declining economies, the jobs promised by meat and poultry firms may seem too good to pass up. But jobs, like lunches, are rarely free. Certainly not in an age when corporations expect public subsidies and tax holidays. As our research has shown, these jobs come with a host of costs to the health and well-being of workers and to the host communities alike. Towns can do much to welcome and serve the needs of meat and poultry workers and their families, and I have helped several do just that. But host communities and workers are virtually powerless to alter the nature of modern meat and poultry processing, since they have no control over the production process. And it is to that production process that I would now like to turn. Today's packing houses are a far cry from those Upton Sinclair described in 1906 in the jungle. But for all their computerization and laser technology, their robotics and ergonomics, the knife, the meat hook, and the steel are still the basic tools of the trade. And today's plants remain, like the ones they replaced, rigidly organized, labor-intensive factories that turn animals into meat. Working on the line in a packing house is physically demanding. Workers remain on their feet most of the day and perform the same repetitive motions thousands of times during their shift. The work is also dangerous. Meat and poultry line workers are exposed to high noise levels, dangerous machinery, awkward work positions, slippery floors, high line speeds, and hazardous chemicals. And meat packing workers are required to wear hard hats, safety glasses, earplugs, steel-toed and rubber-soled shoes, and an amazing array of additional gear intended to protect them from injury. Injury and illness rates have come down in recent years. Even so, the Government Accounting Office found that in 2013, meat and poultry workers suffered the highest incident of total illness cases of all industries in the United States. The illness rate for meat and poultry workers was 4.4 times that of the manufacturing work overall. And underreporting illness and injury is commonplace in packing houses. You do not need to speak English or have a high school diploma or previous work experience to work on a packing house floor. This helps explain why today's meat and poultry industry relies heavily on immigrants and refugees. Plant managers are usually white males, office staff are usually white females. Out on the floor, it's a different story. Mexicans and Guatemalans pull their count alongside Somalis, Burmese, Marshall Islanders, and other immigrant and native-born workers. Low wages and disagreeable working conditions encourage employee turnover. In its first 21 months of operation, monthly turnover among line workers at the Lexington, Nebraska beef plant averaged 12%. When the world's largest beef plant opened near Garden City in 1980, turnover reached as high as 60% a month. But the industry average for established plants is around 6 to 8% a month, which still means that between 72 and 96% of the workforce comes and goes each year. The industry's insatiable appetite for workers means that local labor pools are soon exhausted, and plants recruit from far and wide. Employees are frequently paid bonuses for recruiting new workers if they remain on the job past the probationary period of 90 to 120 days. This practice fosters chain migration and the emergence of immigrant enclaves in packing house towns, which often come from specific sending communities. Why did Tyson choose Tonganoxie as a site for the first new chicken plant it will build from the ground up since 1996, when it opened its Union City plant in Northwest Tennessee? I'm not privy to Tyson's corporate decisions, but here's what I think. Tonganoxie is a small town. There's plenty of grain and water in the area. Environmental and zoning restrictions are limited, and it has easy access to interstate highways, all of which the industry looks for when it selects a site. But Tonganoxie's economy is not declining, and even more unusual, it is close to a metropolitan area and several sizable cities. Large meat and poultry companies always say they want to hire locals to work in their plants, but they know that given the size of their workforces and high turnover rates, they will soon exhaust local labor pools. The labor landscape is changing for meat and poultry processing. It depends heavily on immigrants and refugees to work on its floors, but the Trump administration wants to severely reduce the numbers of immigrants and refugees admitted to the United States. Companies like Tyson are adapting with greater automation on plant floors that can reduce labor needs only, but they can reduce labor needs only so far. At the same time, demand for meat, and especially poultry, is rising, which necessitates increased production and more workers. In its handout on frequently asked questions about this project, Tyson stated, and I quote, "There are about 37,000 people looking for jobs in the $10 to $15 per hour range within a 30-minute drive of Tonganoxie. We anticipate that many of our team members will commute," unquote. Tyson goes on to say that hourly wages will range from $13 to $15 per hour, with some skilled labor paying more than $20 per hour. I knew I forgot that. Okay, sorry. Okay, elsewhere, so Tyson gives some different figures. It says at one point that it's going to pay between $13 and $20 an hour. Elsewhere in the same document it says that the workers will be paid $10 to $15 an hour. So you can look up on the screen and see my computations for what a worker earning $10, $13, $15, and $20 an hour would make. And I've computed the annual gross income, figuring that a worker will work 52 weeks a year, 40 hours a week, and then you see up there what the figures show. So at $10 an hour, the annual gross income, that's before taxes and withholding, will be $20,800 a year. That's $3,800 below the federal poverty level for a household of 4. At $13 an hour, the worker will make $27,000, which is less than $3,000 above the federal poverty level. At $15 an hour, $31,200, 127% of the poverty level, and at $20 an hour, $41,600. That sounds pretty good, but it's only 169% of the poverty line. And remember, these are gross wages. Assuming a household of 4, children of Tyson workers making $15 an hour or less would be eligible for free school lunches. And those making $20 an hour would still be eligible, their children would still be eligible for reduced price lunches. Modest wages, distasteful and dangerous working conditions mean that turnover is the dominant demographic process in packing house towns. To the extent that the packing house employees commute from elsewhere and are already in place in those communities, impacts on Tonganoxie will be mitigated. But unemployment in Leavenworth County stands at 4.3% and 5.9% in Wyandotte County. So the labor pool within a 30-minute drive of Tonganoxie may not be as big as Tyson says. And given high turnover, regional labor pools will soon be exhausted. Community impacts will occur to some degree and at some point. Exactly how much and exactly when are determined by who Tyson workers are, where they come from, and where they ultimately settle. Bear in mind that many commuters will move to the town where the plant is located if affordable housing is available. When people come to town looking for work in a meat and poultry plant, the first thing they need is a place to stay until they get a job and enough money for a deposit on rental housing. Transitional housing is a major problem in packing house towns, as is affordable permanent housing. Following the example of Garden City's Emmaus House, both Lexington, Nebraska and Guyman, Oklahoma established homeless shelters to provide temporary housing and meals for low-income persons coming to find work. These shelters also provide food boxes on a weekly basis to residents who cannot make ends meet. Given its pay scale, many of the people receiving food assistance will be Tyson employees. The influx of workers and their families, as well as those who take low-paying spin-off jobs in the service sector that invariably come with packing houses, additional strains will be placed on the healthcare system. Meeting the healthcare needs of established residents is also compromised because rural areas generally suffer from a shortage of healthcare professionals. Long hours, unpredictable work schedules, and heavy patient loads often translate into physicians' unwillingness to accept new patients. Low-wage workers and their families may be uninsured and often must resort to the ER for routine health care. Tyson workers are not eligible for health insurance until after their probationary period, 3 to 4 months. And even after they are eligible, many do not take health insurance because they cannot afford it. Language and cultural barriers add to the challenge of health care delivery to newcomers. Many immigrants and refugees lack English language skills, which complicates patient diagnoses. On the surface, providing translators seems like a simple expedient. But some clients may refuse to share their particular symptoms with someone from the same community for fear that their condition will be publicized. And programs like Language Line have practical limitations. This problem declines as the second generation achieves fluency in English, but the changing face of meatpacking's workforce continually presents new linguistic and cultural challenges. Changes in population are clearly seen in the schools. Enrollments rise, as do turnover and dropout rates. Ethnic and linguistic diversity increase. The number of children eligible for free and reduced school meals is likely to rise. Garden City, Dodge City, Liberal in Kansas, Mayfield and Seabury in Kentucky, Storm Lake and Columbus Junction in Iowa, Guyman, Oklahoma, Brooks in Alberta and Brandon in Manitoba, Canada, Lexington, Grand Island, and Fremont, Nebraska. Despite great distance and divergent historical and cultural traditions, these communities have faced similar challenges: growth, often rapid and explosive, population mobility, dramatic increases in cultural and linguistic diversity, escalating crime, health, and social problems, strains on infrastructure and social services. Packing houses exact a high price in illness and injury from many line workers. They also bring significant social and economic costs to host communities. Declining per capita income, housing shortages, increases in population mobility, rising demands for health care, public safety, education, and indigent care. Employers generally ignore the added costs that come with their workforces. These costs fall on local residents who, in addition to paying higher taxes, give of their time and money to support food banks, homeless shelters, and other newcomer services. If Tyson builds a chicken plant in Tonganoxie, these outcomes will likely be spread among several towns in northeast Kansas, some small, some large. If Tyson goes to Concordia or Hutchinson, as recent news stories suggest, these consequences will fall primarily on those towns, since the likelihood of a large number of commuters in the workforce will be reduced. I'm switching gears now, so. Since 1998, I've studied the impact of a Tyson chicken plant on Webster County, Kentucky, where I was born and am half owner in a family grain farm. Tyson's plant received chickens from 124 growers who operated 667 chicken houses in 10 counties. Of those, 572, 86%, were in 3 adjacent counties immediately to the south of the processing plant. The greatest number, 227, were in Webster County, and my family farm has 8 broiler houses within 1 mile. There's my little farm there. Today, this plant employs 1,400 workers to slaughter and process 1.5 million broilers a week. That's 4.5 chickens every second the line is running. At this rate, 60 broiler houses, each home to about 25,000 birds, are emptied every week. The chicken plant proposed for Tonganoxie is on the same scale as Tyson's plant in Roberts, Kentucky. Tyson says it will employ 1,600 workers to slaughter 1.25 million chickens per week and will need between 300 and 400 houses to grow out broilers for its Tonganoxie plant. The Tonganoxie plant is projected to slaughter 1.25 million birds a week. That's 65 million a year. For every pound of gain, a chicken produces half a pound of dry waste. This waste, combined with rice hulls or wood chips spread on the floors of chicken houses, is called litter. Grown to a weight of 6 pounds, 65 million birds will generate 195 million pounds of litter a year. All this waste must go somewhere. Someday it may be converted into alternative power, but for now, virtually all of it gets spread on cropland as fertilizer. Spread on fields at 4 tons per acre, the recommended rate, this litter will fertilize 24,275 acres, or 38 square miles of Kansas every year. This, by the way, this houses the chicken litter in between while it's waiting to be spread on your farm ground. Chicken litter is an excellent fertilizer, but if applied at levels above the nutrient absorption rates of soils and crops, runoff and subsequent ground and surface water pollution will occur. Air pollution will also be an issue. In 2007, an Iowa State University study found that 2 Western Kentucky chicken houses emitted over 10 tons of ammonia in 1 year, levels sufficient to cause respiratory harm. When I began my research on poultry production in Western Kentucky in 1998, Tyson's plant was barely 2 years old, and most of his growers had been in operation for not much more than a year. They generally agreed with the pullet grower who told me, "I think it's been great. It's contributed to the decline of the unemployment rate. It's brought a lot of dollars in here. Our grain farmers are getting more prime money for their grain. The wages paid out and the spin-off dollars have tremendous effect on the country around here. It's a heck of an improvement." A heck of an improvement? Many growers no longer think so. Tyson lets growers keep all the money from the first flock, so, as one local skeptic put it, they get dollar signs in their eyes. But beginning with the second flock, loans start coming due, and the reality of income, expenses, and cash flow become increasingly apparent. Sean grossed $36,000 on his first flock in 1998, more than most people in the county make in a year. But energy prices soared in 2001. Sean spent $2,800 on electricity per flock for his 6 houses that summer, and $25,000 to heat his flock that winter. Many of the chicks he received in his next flock were blind. Sean and other growers complained that Tyson was extending the time between flocks to 20 days, the maximum allowed without paying a penalty. A flock takes 7 weeks to mature, and several such delays could cost the farmer a whole flock per year, the difference between making money and losing money. In the summer of 2002, Tyson picked up Sean's last flock and terminated his contract. The company had told him to make $10,000 in improvements to his houses. When he said he could not afford the expense, the company representative told him to borrow the money. When Sean said he was too far in debt to qualify for another loan, Tyson refused to send him more birds. After deducting expenses from the payment for his last flock, about 150,000 broilers, Sean received a check from Tyson for $33.22. Sean's 6 chicken houses stood empty until 2005, when Tyson paid more than $50,000 in back taxes he owed on his farm and bought his chicken houses and the 31 acres they sit upon for 40 cents on the dollar. Sean was able to retain ownership of the farm's remaining 130 acres, however. A month later, a Mennonite farmer new to the area bought the houses from Tyson and the remainder of Sean's farm. 5.5 years later, the Mennonite sold those houses to another grower for almost double what he paid for them. But it was still 25% less than Sean's original purchase price. Sean's story is far from unique. Other growers I first interviewed in 1998 also suffered financial difficulties and conflict with Tyson. Some called it quits, some sold out, others declared bankruptcy, and lenders foreclosed on their houses, or Tyson repossessed them and then ran them with hired labor. Tyson's ad in a local newspaper for a farm manager for one of these complexes required that applicants must be capable of bending, squatting, pulling, lifting, and prolonged walking and standing. Must be able to work in dusty environment and inclement weather conditions. High school diploma or equivalent preferred. Couples preferred. The ad also warned that absences from the farm cannot be for more than 2 hours at a time. Given such working conditions, it's no wonder some growers sold out, left their houses empty, or abandoned them altogether. As a grower who sold out after 4 years told me, they was just saying whatever they could to get you to grow chickens. It was all misleading. Money, payback, like the time you had and the time that you had to put into it, it wasn't right. I just got to where I didn't like it anymore. Putting up with Tyson and being there 24/7, and I couldn't go anywhere, and picking up dead chickens. Tyson could not stay in business if all its growers felt this way. Frank, one of Tyson's top growers, told me, "I've made more money than I was led to believe that I would make, and most of the bad press that the poultry industry got when they arrived in Kentucky, as far as I'm concerned, almost none of it has proved to be true." He liked growing chickens, but he admitted, "It probably takes more work than I thought it would. Sometimes I feel like a galley slave. But I can get up when I want to, go to bed when I want to, and say the hell with it for a day or so if I want to." But then Frank had a full-time employee to work his chickens. The summer of 2011 was hot and dry. It was hard on chickens and hard on chicken farmers. Frank lost 5,000 six-week-old chickens to the heat in early August, just 1 week before they were to go to slaughter. Another grower lost 50,000 birds. Altogether, Tyson growers lost 200,000 birds in western Kentucky during that heat spell. Growers are not paid for birds that die before the company picks them up, and they must dispose of dead birds. Frank sold his 6 broiler houses in 2013. He was 70 years old, had been growing chickens for Tyson for 15 years, and came out a little bit ahead on the sale of his houses. He didn't know whether to blame the company or the local plant manager, but his relationship with the company had soured. Over the last 6 months, Tyson has proved you and your co-author right, he admitted, referring to what Michael Broadway and I had written about the poultry industry in Slaughterhouse Blues. The problem with Tyson, he concluded, is that they think growers don't know anything and don't need to know anything except the delivery date and the pickup date of their chickens. A county extension agent put it this way: Tyson thinks chickens grow themselves. As a result, company representatives do not treat growers well. They understate the amount of work that goes into raising chickens, and they overstate the income. In September 2017, last month, 22 years after the first chicken houses were built in Webster County, 40 grower complexes holding 215 chicken houses were still in production. Another 8 complexes holding 37 houses were idle or had been torn down or destroyed by high winds. Of the 48 original complexes, 2/3 had been sold at least once. Some had been sold as many as 7 times, and on average they had been sold 3 times since construction. Of 21 grower complexes where I could determine purchase prices over time, 13 sales were for a loss, 8 were for a gain. Tyson contracts with some 4,000 of what it calls independent farmers to grow chickens in the United States. Poultry companies like to say that they and their growers are financial partners in the poultry industry. Each side does put up about half the capital necessary to support the industry, but the relationship is far from equal. The company owns not only the birds, but the genetic patent on them. It owns the feed, medicine, trucks used to bring feed to the grower and haul birds to its slaughterhouse, and the brand under which they are marketed. The grower owns the farm, the chicken houses, and the considerable debt incurred to finance, maintain, and upgrade them. The grower must provide the labor necessary to raise the birds, pay for water and utilities, and dispose of their manure and any birds that die in his care. Growers are compensated according to what economists call a tournament pay system. Tyson sets the base price per pound live weight, then makes adjustments in pay according to performance, judged by feed conversion and death loss. In this tournament, each grower is ranked in an ordinal scale against all others whose birds are slaughtered at that plant in the same week, and his pay is adjusted accordingly. Growers are compensated only for those birds that reach the processing plant. But growers are not present when the birds are weighed and cannot challenge head counts, weights, death loss, or the peer rankings that determine the amount of payment per pound. Growers have little recourse in disputes with companies, and stories of abuse and intimidation are commonplace. The company can send you sick birds or short flocks. It can short you on feed or short weigh your birds when they are delivered for slaughter. And it can keep your birds waiting at the processing plant scales so that they will lose weight and you will lose money. It can require you to make costly upgrades to your houses. It can mandate resolution of disputes through arbitration and require you to sign away your rights to sue. And if you challenge the company, it can cancel your contract. A 2001 study by the National Contract Poultry Growers Association and the U.S. Department of Agriculture found that 71% of all growers whose income came solely from chicken production lived below the poverty line. In 2011, nearly a fifth of large grower operations and nearly a third of smaller ones had negative net farm income. More than 20% of the smallest poultry farms and almost 10% of the larger ones failed to cover cash expenses. It's not for me to say whether you should support the proposed chicken plant. But before you decide whether to support the plant or oppose it, you should ask Tyson some hard questions and get some concrete answers. And you should ask state and local officials and yourselves whether this is the kind of economic development that will foster community development and a better social and physical environment for all the people of Northeast Kansas. Thank you.
If you'll turn your cards in, Sarah's picking them up. Sue is also back here picking up cards if you have questions that you want to do. Okay. Also, I want to remind people on your way out, be sure we have a bibliography there, resource list if you'd like to pick up. You're welcome to have it. Okay.
I haven't talked that long in 2 years. That's why I retired from the university. Couldn't talk that long anymore.
Your age is showing delusional symptoms. You probably have. I forgot to say that we have a first video here that we appreciate, and also I don't have the name, but I know a high school student here is streaming on Facebook. I don't even know what that means, but anyway, streaming on Facebook here, so we appreciate helping with that. I tell people I'm just one step past the rotary dial phone, so some of you don't even know what that is. I don't know. Where's it on Facebook?
Lawrence Ecology Teams United in Sustainability. It's really short. So,
It's also under Levitt.
yeah, LETUS. So we're going to, Sue is collecting the cards and we'll be sorting them. So hold up your hands if you have some that we haven't picked up yet. She's coming around the back. And so I'm going to start with a question. This is for you, but I'll say it to them. Is there an appropriate location anywhere for corporate controlled chicken or beef production or processing?
That's really up to local communities. We eat, as Americans, over 200 pounds per person of flesh protein per year. That has to come from somewhere. And there are communities where economies are stagnant, and the jobs that are offered by meat or poultry processing are attractive to some workers. To say that is there any place or not any place, I think is really not for me to say. It's for local people to say. When the chicken plant came to my part of Kentucky, I called up my relatives, most all of whom are corn farmers, and said, "Let me come and tell you what's going to happen. And if y'all want it, fine." At that time, the company was promising 7 to 10 cents premium per bushel of corn sold. And so all of my relatives and everybody else there could hear was 10-cent premium on corn. Wow, that's going to be great. A couple of years after, that plant was built by Hudson Foods in 1996. Hudson Foods went belly up as a result of a beef recall. Tyson bought the plant. Shortly after Tyson bought the plant, it quit paying the premium on corn. Not long thereafter, it quit accepting truckloads of grain from local farmers unless they called Springdale, Arkansas, talked to the grain buyer in Springdale, and were able to undercut whatever other prices of grain might be on the market. So now the grain that comes into that plant, that feed mill just up the road from my house, comes from who knows where. Comes by rail, it could be coming from anywhere in the country, even from places like Brazil. So what they thought they were going to get was not what they got. And now when I go back, they complain about the odor and the truck traffic and all the other things that I've been talking about now for for the last 30 minutes. So, you know, it's, that's the best I can do.
And I'll maybe ask somebody from the back to be a runner and bring me questions as you're sorting them. I have another one here. I think you mentioned this, but maybe elaborate a little bit. How do they dispose of the solid waste, the bones and feathers and fat and et cetera?
The farmers dispose of the birds, and they, it used to be that Tyson gave these pretty little blue refrigerators in front of each house, and the company came by and picked those up periodically and took it to its, what it called its protein plant, which was rendering. But they quit doing that after several pretty messy wrecks of rendering trucks on the highway, and so now the farmers have to dispose of birds primarily by composting. They can either compost them or burn them. In terms of the chickens, when they go to the plant, not every single bit of the chicken, they use everything but the cluck, but it doesn't all go out to be eaten. That's an old jungle joke. And it's rendered and is used for various stuff. Stuff happens, for sure.
Can you tell us what impact Tyson Company has had on the quality of water?
If you've been following the news lately, Tyson just paid several $million in fines for water pollution in Missouri. And that's just one of a long line of cases where it has been accused and rightly so for polluting water. So it's water quality goes way down. And you may remember back in the 90s the so-called cell from hell on the eastern shore of Maryland, the Delmarva Peninsula, the dinoflagellates, where all sorts of nasty things were happening. Fish kills were rampant. Those are the result of too much nutrients in the water. It doesn't necessarily all come from chicken farms, but a lot of it comes from chicken farms and also from us fertilizing our yards more than we need to. And so that chicken litter is a great fertilizer, but over time you get too much of a good thing, and then you see water pollution resulting. So yeah, it's going to happen, and we can see Tyson has a long record of being taken to court over those issues.
What happens to surrounding property values?
What happens to surrounding property values? In Webster County, I've been working closely with the tax assessor there, and the figures that I gave you on sales of chicken houses come from him. He's unable to say concretely that it causes X amount of dollars loss in property value. But whoops. You can see this. You can see back here the chicken houses in the background. So there's no doubt that in some cases it definitely affects them. I would say I have 8 chicken houses within a mile of my farm. There used to be 12, but 4 of them blew down in a tornado. You know, it doesn't affect the value of that farm ground. I have not tried to sell it, nor do I intend to, so I don't really know what it would do. But I can't give you any concrete studies that talk about that. But there's certainly plenty of anecdotal information of people who have tried to sell their homes near these facilities and had a very difficult time. Obviously, this is pretty clear what this family is experiencing.
So these are 2 related questions. Do workers get paid if they have job-related illnesses or injury, and then how often is workers' comp received, if you know to speak to that?
I spent several months going to workers' compensation hearings in Garden City. And I've written about it quite a bit. Workers are eligible for compensation if they are injured on the job. But Tyson or any company will bring its law that goes to workers' comp court, and Tyson will fight it tooth and nail, and they have lots more attorneys than you do as an injured worker. And so in general, workers, they may be compensated, but very often it takes them a long, long time and they give up. Also, under the Bush repetitive motion injuries, repetitive motion injuries, reporting of repetitive motion injuries is no longer required. And meat and poultry processing is not a particularly lethal industry. A lot of people don't get killed, although some people do. But it's very hard on you. You do the same job literally thousands and thousands and thousands of times an hour. You get a 15-minute break 2.5 hours into your shift. You get a 30-minute lunch break. That's it. You're supposed to get relief breaks, but you're this big line and you're doing your job, and if you step off of the line to go to the bathroom, the person down the line from you has got to do that much more. And so there's a great deal of pressure not to step off of the line. And so what that means is that people, their bodies wear out. Injuries tend to occur in the first 6 months or so when you're learning your job, and then after a while, then they tend to then occur subsequently after you've been on the job for a while, because your body begins to wear out. I had a friend who worked for 8 years on the IBP kill floor in Garden City. His wife said when he got up in the morning, he sounded like Rice Krispies, snap, crackle, and pop. And he was able to stay on the job for 8 years because he shifted from he bid on different jobs, so he would use different muscles. So it's a very debilitating kind of job, and you don't retire from meatpacking lines. You wear out. You get injured, you quit, you get fired, and so.
Are you surprised by the community reaction to Tyson? And are you surprised about Tyson's decision to look elsewhere in Kansas?
I went to the first meeting at the park in Tonganoxie, and then to the second one. I was really pleasantly shocked, I guess, by the immediate and intense groundswell of opposition that occurred really almost overnight. I've been in lots of communities, talked to as plants were coming in or being considered. I've never seen the opposition emerge so quickly and such a large body of people coming together and so many organizations coming together. So I think the people of Tonganoxie and Northeast Kansas should all pat themselves on the back, give themselves a big round of applause for so quickly, go right ahead, for so quickly mounting that kind of opposition. Tyson, whenever it goes into someplace, and it's not, I keep talking about Tyson because this is what we're talking about, but you could be talking about Purdue or Pilgrim's Pride or any number of other companies. They're all pretty much the same. They have several other communities that they're looking at, and that doesn't surprise me at all that they've got other ones they're thinking about, and they've been thinking about those from the beginning. They want to get as many benefits as they can. They have certain things they need: water, grain, good highway system, workers, but I'm not at all surprised. They're not, they haven't said they're not coming here yet, so people should be cognizant that they may still come, but it doesn't surprise me at all. The issue about labor, January 20th, when Trump issued his proposed ban on several Muslim countries, that day, CEOs from several meatpacking firms and the American Meat Institute came out strongly opposed to the immigration and refugee policies of Trump. They have depended heavily on refugees and immigrants. If that stream dries up, then they are in a pickle. And my view is that's why they were considering Tonganoxie. I don't think that they thought they would run into the buzzsaw that they did, however.
So I have a few law questions here. Should Tyson and other large chicken processors be subject to antitrust law? What is your opinion on that?
I'm not an attorney, but I am the vice president of the Organization for Competitive Markets. Our view is that we have laws on the books that would work against the intense concentration. As Paul said in his introduction, between 80 and 90% of the beef in America is slaughtered by 4 companies, about 60 or 70% of the pork, about 60% of the chickens. But those companies, Tyson is a protein company. It's got beef and pork and poultry. JBS, you may not know, the largest beef company in the world, also owns Pilgrim's Pride. So that these companies are a very small handful of companies controls our food. And if the the Bayer Monsanto sale goes through, then 3 companies will control about 80 to 90% of seeds and fertilizer and chemicals and all that stuff. Of course, we can think about computers, and we can think about telephones and TVs, and concentration is everywhere. And it's much worse than it was in the early 20th century when Teddy Roosevelt and the trust busters were at work. It's gotten much worse, and we have let it slip up on us, and we are paying the price for that.
So this is a companion question to that. Can we create a regional diversified chicken market?
I think some other people in this room are probably better able to answer that question than I. What has happened over the last 50, 60 years or so is that that regional market of slaughterhouses and things has disappeared. And so there isn't the slaughter capacity to bring back those small slaughterhouses that were around earlier. And we're going to have to reconstitute that system. And we are seeing the rise of what's called an alternative agricultural system. In reality, it's just going back to the way it was around about the end of World War II. And so that infrastructure has been destroyed. We've seen the chickenization of agriculture, so that the pork market, there is no market, there hasn't been a market in chickens for a long time. 97% of chickens are raised under contract. The pork market is gone, and the beef market is fast disappearing. So dairy the same way. I've been studying tobacco farmers. That's the main cash crop, was the main cash crop for small Kentucky farmers until chickens came along. With the end of the federal tobacco program, tobacco farmers are now in the same system. They have to grow under contract to a multinational corporation who sets the conditions of how you grow it, how much you grow it, what chemicals you put on it, and you have to renew your contract every year. So agriculture is agriculture has been chickenized, and we've got to now reconstitute a different kind of agriculture. It's going to take a long time. We didn't get here overnight. We're not going to get out of it overnight. But we are seeing a lot of people in this room are very active in that so-called alternative agricultural system. It's just the old system that has been pushed aside and marginalized, and now people are fighting and trying to bring that back.
And so, I don't know if this is a loaded question or not for a meat eater, as you have claimed you are. How can we take back control of the meat industry through our own habits? Or, in other words, eating meat or not eating meat?
That's really the only way we can do it. I've been studying the industry for 30 years. In that time, we've seen the emergence of concern, serious concern for animal welfare, and we have seen the industry respond to that. We've seen serious concern over antibiotics in our meat. We've seen the industry respond to that. This plant is going to be a no antibiotics ever, NAE. That's what they billed it as. I see head shaking no, so maybe I got the information wrong, but that's what they were originally arguing. Well, I'm not talking about whether it's really true or not, but that's what they say. Yes?
I'll just mention this. There's no human antibiotics. They will still use veterinary antibiotics. They will still use things called iodophores and something called antimicrobials.
There you go. So the industry has responded. It's responded primarily to big retailers like McDonald's and Chipotle and those who are getting pressure from their consumers to have animals that are treated humanely, have less nasty stuff in our food. We have not seen that kind of public outcry over the treatment of workers or growers. And until we do, we're not going to see movement on that. We as consumers we make our own food choices. So I don't buy Tyson chicken. I eat very little chicken. I buy my beef from a friend of mine who raised pasture-raised Black Angus in Hopkins County, Kentucky. I grow as many of my own vegetables as I can. I mean, we can do those things if we choose, and that's really the only way that we can change things, is to change our habits and put pressure on the companies to do something about it. Now, what we do see is big companies moving into the organic market, into grass-fed and pasture-raised and natural and all that stuff, because they recognize that there's a big groundswell of that concern by consumers, so they're jumping on the bandwagon. So Laura's Lean Beef and a lot of those companies that started out as small companies have been bought out by the big companies.
In the interest of time, because we need to wrap it up here and close up, I think that's the last question that we have for you tonight. We did collect more questions. Some of them were asking similar questions, so we kind of rephrased them. And we will compile that, and if we can, we'll work with you maybe to make a frequently asked questions with answers.
Sure.
To post at some point on the Lettuce.
I'd be happy to.
Thad, do you want to come up and close for us?
Let me just...
Thank you, Sarah Calafario. We want you assured and to know that there are books up here that you'd be willing to sign, and he wants to say something else, I can tell.
I just want to hawk my book. I just want to hawk my book. I'm a hawker. It's available for $20, which is well under what the multinational corporation monopolistic company charges for it. If you're interested, it makes great Christmas presents for your vegan friends, as well as for your flexitarians or reducitarians or other tarians that you might associate with.
Thank you so much.